Mina, I think we first interacted or briefly met in Carnegie Mellon. So tell us a little bit about your journey into what led you to doing what you did and how did you shift?
Well, thanks, Amrita, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here with Alka and with Ushmita. I'm actually working with both of them. I've just started working with both of them recently this past year during the pandemic. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about their individual journeys as well. My journey is a little bit crazy, actually. I was always interested in the arts, but the performing arts was something that my parents kind of, was part of my growing up. But it was never something that was taken seriously as a career. Like all good Bengali girls, I had to have culture, as part of my, everyday um, surroundings. And my parents are huge cultural enthusiasts. But I went to Carnegie Mellon with an idea that I might want to study art management, actually, but ended up doing a policy and management course, master's degree, and information systems and finance. So, and that was just the logical progression because I was fairly ambitious and wanted to do well financially, and that was what was hot. I mean, CMU was known for information systems and finance. I went to I started my career on Wall Street and as a management consultant initially, and then later on as the vice president of convertibles arbitrage hedge fund, which was a huge departure from everything that I was doing. But along with being in New York, what happened was that it was a very exciting time for people from South Asia in New York. There was a quiet revolution that was taking place. There was a certain amount of ghettoization that a lot of South Asians were pushing back against. People like Jhumpa Lahiri, a lot of artists and activists I stumbled into one evening sort of a very fringe festival called Diasporadics. And it was a festival of arts and activism. And it was electrifying when I walked in. There were all of these ideas, conversations about identity, conversations about, heritage, conversations about our lives as women, gender for sure. And that was sort of like a starting point, and I got involved. I became one of the people who was helping produce. I was more privileged than a lot of other activists at that time. And I felt like I could really contribute from the production point of view for that. While we were producing, there was another thing that was happening, which was like a music revolution. The underground, South Asian underground music was taking, everyone from Talvin to Karshkale to, and there was sort of this very exciting mix of activism and music that was happening in the clubs, and there were no clubs that were actually catering to South Asians. So there would be like this flash club or a flash mob, where people would just gather and again talk politics and talk music. And one of those days, in a very drunken kind of after a very drunken nightclub experience, I looked up on the ceiling and there were all of these beautiful artworks that were above my head. And I don't know whether it was the intoxication, the music, but whatever it was, I looked up and it felt incredibly inspirational. It turned out that it was the work of this amazing curator called Lisa Emedy, who later on went to become one of a documenter curator. But at that time, she had just put out works in like this converted church that was a nightclub. And I looked at the work, felt immediately like something transformed within. And, I had been working for quite some time, and I decided that I would pursue my dancing, and I took a sabbatical for 2 years. decided to take a sabbatical for 2 years. During the course of that sabbatical, I gained what are called my street credibility in New York. New York was an amazing place that allows you to dream. It embraced me as a dancer. I mean, my dance company did better than I could have ever imagined. But even while we were performing, one of the things that really frustrated me was the sort of Orientalism that kind of followed all Eastern art practices. And, a few years later, about, when I had really been subsumed by the New York art scene, I felt in the New York art performance scene, I felt this frustration of not having producers or programmers who were really viewing the South Asian arts beyond its surface level of, how exotic or how, amazing costumes. That felt very frustrating because, as we all know, there are incredible sort of there are incredible layers to all, and it's complex. I mean, nothing about South Asia is, nothing that one says about South Asia is true without the opposite of also being true. So I kind of wanted to create a space where art practitioners, different disciplines of art would come together and converse. And that's how Engendered was imagined. And it was at the inaugural session actually had Dr. Pandey also visit during that time. And I remember she had written a fantastic book on the Ardhanarishwari, which spoke very much to the gender sexuality at the intersection of ritual and religion that the festival wanted to really explore, because we felt like that's something that was just not talked about or represented, and yet it permeated everything in literature and dance and visual arts and sculpture. So that's how Engendered started. And then, it grew into like this monster festival of like four. It became one of the largest South Asian festivals, several festivals. There were four festivals by the time it ended, with the cinema component, with the performing arts component, with the visual arts component. And then it just continued from there. And before I knew it, I was fully immersed. So that was my immersion into the arts. And, and about, I think, after 25 years of living in New York, I decided to come back to India. I'd never really worked in India as an adult. So I wanted to see, what it was like, really connect and understand. And the first 5 years, I think I ran a gallery or an alternative space for production, but I really just learned to listen and hear and see everything that was happening. And since then, I've been curating in India, and it's been quite special and challenging at the same time.